This is The End in Mind, Season 1, Episode 5.
Well, welcome to The End in Mind, and my name is Lori Lane, and I'm here today with my co-host Danielle Sterner, and we're going to be changing it up a little bit today. We're going to be talking about community, but today I'm going to talk to Danielle about community and ask her some questions because she really has a good handle on this particular topic. So welcome back to the studio, Danielle.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Community. So what is it? How would you describe that?
Well, I think there's two ways to answer that. I think what do we think it is one question, and what should it be?
Right.
Maybe is another. And I think we as Christians often get that very confused. So, when we think about community, we think about relationships, we think about, a lot of times I think we think about organizations because we have had such an institutionalized society.
Neighborhoods, churches.
Right. Churches, schools,
Right.
community organizations, Little League, all those kinds of things. And those are important things with great activities that are available. And sometimes they do provide community. But I think what you're asking is, what is community from a biblical standpoint?
Yes, I am.
So, knowing you. So, I read, one of my favorite musicians of all time is Michael Card. And he has written almost the entire Bible and the principles therein in song.
Right.
And he's just an amazing, very broad musician. And he has written some books as well. They happen to be my favorite books of all the books that I read. Defining moments for me come through some of the writings of Michael Card. And one of his books, called Scribbling in the Sand,
Oh, I love that book.
talks about community, and it talks about how it affects the arts. And when we live in community the way Christ intended, that out of that comes an expression of that culture. And we see that definitely in history. And I think that's one of the things that makes Artios so unique, is that our kids are studying the culture, the expressions of the ideas of the people that live together in relationship in a time and a place.
Yes.
And by doing that, it's almost like they get transported in time into that culture.
Yes.
So when we're talking about recreating culture and having creativity come out of that, I think what Michael defined it as in that book, which I thought was brilliant, he actually broke the word down in the original language. Come and with. Community is broken down into come and with, and it actually means with walls. So there's this idea, we talk so much about building bridges. And there's this idea that Michael talks about in Scribbling in the Sand, I think it's in the first chapter, that we need to be purposeful about building walls. And I think particularly as homeschoolers, we tend to really want to bridge the gap. If we're Christians and we have a heart for the lost and for the people that we live around, we want to bridge the gap, and we want to reach out to those people. We want to build relationships with those people. And so the idea of being separatists, I think, we don't want to be associated with that.
Right, exactly.
But I think in order for us to be strong as individuals and as families, we need a place where we're safe. We need a place where the walls are there. They're built on purpose. They're guarded by gatekeepers in our life. And there's a place where we're safe. And then we can, from that, start to build bridges. But there is a time to kind of pull inside those walls. And I think when we're raising our children, they need to have some sense of a place of safety where they can express who they are and discover who they are and explore, like we've talked about in other segments, with freedom. And just there needs to be a safe place. So for me, community is a safe place where culture is created. That's how I would define it.
Gotcha. A safe place where culture is created. One of the things I think that's been the most challenging for me as a homeschool mom over the years, especially No, it was here too. I lived in Atlanta, and then about 8 years ago, we moved to Colorado. And I moved from a really big city where I was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people
Right.
to a rural community where there really isn't very many people. And there were times when I was surrounded by hundreds of thousands of people here and still felt without a community.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times when I have been there truly isolated and have felt without a community. Why? And it leaves this feeling of where do I fit? Where's my spot? Where's my home base? So, you've described what community is, but I have a hard time sometimes verbalizing why it's so important.
Well, I think we have to start with the fact that God is a relational God and that he created us as relational beings. And I think that sense is a longing in us, and it's a longing that we were created with. It's a longing to feel a part of something.
Yes.
God placed Adam in the garden and had said up until that point that everything he created was good. And then he saw Adam alone, and it was not good. And he created Eve.
That's right.
So he created community in Genesis, in the very beginning.
Yeah.
And I think it's in all of us to just have that need and to desire relationship. And I think, for me as well, because I'm an external processor and a very social being in my personality, I just need it's almost like an orientation for me. It's the dynamic of those relationships and that safe place where I can bounce things off of other people and safely get the feedback that I need to change direction or to stay the course.
Right.
And so I think it's so important for us to live in a place where we can explore who we are, and we have the freedom to do that because the people around us believe the best about us. Because they're looking at us through the eyes of God and with his grace. They're saying, this is a place where you can feel free to explore and experiment and try things and express things. And I'm okay for you to do that. This is an okay place for you to do that. And so I think, I think we start with the fact that God is relational and in us, and that he created community, and then he developed families, and then he developed the church. And when you look at the nation of Israel, it was God created community, and we see it all through Scripture.
One of the things I think that homeschoolers were accused of, or maybe even known from at the beginning, was not just a separatist from a community, but almost an isolationist sort of thing.
Yes, definitely.
Where they kind of pulled out. They didn't do anything with anybody, not even other families of like mind. It was very segmented. And what do you think the dangers are of doing that, both from a family perspective, and then also from a mom's perspective when she isolates herself and doesn't find community?
I think, well, first off, I would say there's a danger to our culture when that happens. And the way that reflects on our value system, and ultimately for those of us who are Christians in the homeschooling movement, it reflects ultimately on Christ in a way that I don't think he ever intended.
Right.
He said he came to heal the sick, not the well. And that required him to be in places that the Pharisees very clearly were uncomfortable with. Yes, and really challenged him on that. And he said, no, you don't understand. I am here for these people. And he, the woman at the well, and there were so many examples when you look in Scripture of him being in places that would have been considered culturally questionable from that religious community. And so I think first we have to address the fact that what message are we sending, and what are we reflecting? But then as individuals, I think definitely isolation is an issue. I think anybody in this culture, any woman in this culture who attempts to go against the grain of what the media is driving at this point, and what a very humanistic worldview is driving, is going to be fighting battles just all the time. And I think that it really gives opportunity for Satan, honestly. I think that it gives that isolation. We can start just hearing our own voice
Yes,
and we can kind of go
for
crazy
sure.
in that
Yeah,
a little bit.
absolutely.
And just that sense of loneliness is very detrimental. And then I think ultimately when we're talking about modeling, which is what this is all about, is, you know, when our children are watching us, I want to be defined by my love for people, all kinds of people, all people in all different cultures, people from different that have chosen different educational, because I want to reflect that Christ loves people. And so if I'm not building relationships and building community and honestly taking the risks, because it's always emotionally risky to build community and to build those relationships and to be transparent and to initiate. But I want my children to see me doing that because I want that to be modeled. I want that to be caught. I want them to love people and ultimately, I think, reflect on Christ in that way.
You just mentioned that about, you know, for us, and I think it was a different segment we were talking about when we started Artios, it was almost creating a community for us with like-minded families. How, you know, sometimes in different environments, we need ideas on how to stimulate building community or how to get it started, or what are we looking for? What have you done in your experience that's helped with that?
That's a really good question. This is one of those things that can be a little bit controversial when I have this discussion with other families and with other parents. You know, we're pretty unashamed at the fact that we have chosen our children's friends most of their life. And of course, you know, when you put it to a kid growing up, they don't like to think that those friends are being chosen for them. So it was never as overt as that because control was never the goal. We were not trying. Exactly.
Okay.
So it was an exposure. It was and we could make very minor adjustments as we got to know friends and our kids' friends. We could make minor adjustments in how much time they were spending with those friends and really give a lot of guidance and facilitation and direction to feeding the relationships that we knew were going to ultimately bring our child closer to the end.
The end in mind.
That we had.
Yes,
the end in mind that we had. Or moving them away from that.
Right.
And that's a touchy thing, and I think we're going to talk about that more in part 2.
Yes.
That parting that needs to happen. But, you know, just talking about feeding it, we are always looking for where is our child going to live up to their potential? Where are they going to be the most celebrated for who they are uniquely created to be?
Yes.
And who are those people? And pretty much we would go to any length to make that happen.
Right.
So I think, what was your original question?
Well,
what did that look like?
Yes,
so,
exactly.
So choosing our kids' friends,
right,
I think is important, and who we place ourselves in proximity to. Obviously, church decisions go into that. Activities go into that. And then eventually we came to Artios. I think you have to... I think you also have to start with what kind of subculture you're living in. You know, we moved from Michigan, where we were in a smaller town, not tiny, not super rural, but very much so, more so than we are in Atlanta now. And there were just a couple of churches that were evangelical churches where we would associate with other Christians. We pretty much knew the core group of people in that area that were of like mind. And had relationships with them, and that was wonderful. When we moved to Atlanta, it was a huge culture change for us, and that went into some of those depression issues that I had and some of the anxiety that I had during that season of my life. It was very much a culture shock. But so I think you have to start with what culture am I in, and there is a journey of acceptance that I had to go on to accept. I wanted to go back to Michigan, and we tried, and we almost did a couple of times. Because it was just very different here. It's very transient. It's a big city. It's very metropolitan. People are in their cars a lot of the time.
Right.
You know, the seasons when we were homeschooling in Michigan, the homeschooling moms would get together and make a huge pot of soup and homemade bread and get the kids together so that they could play hard and we could encourage one another. And because being inside in someone's home was necessary.
Right.
And so there was a different type of hospitality, a different sense.
Right.
So I think you have to start with looking at your culture and saying, you know, how can I do this here? And it took us a few years to find our groove, but then we found Artios. And for being in a big city, and really most of the churches, that we and our friends attend in this area are very large, and they're not small community churches close to home. And so Artios has become a real tool for us building community in that.
Well, that's good to hear. We recently went to, my husband has been coaching the local high school baseball team in Colorado at the public high school, and it's a very small school. I mean, the probably graduating class had 21 or something. I mean, we're talking small.
Yeah, tiny.
And it was interesting to watch at graduation this year. They gave away over $52,000 worth of local scholarships.
Wow.
Now, I'm going to tie this back to community, but these are just small businessmen, ranchers, farmers that want to give money to these kids to help them further their education. And when you're looking, and I looked at that and I thought, that's amazing that they're reaching out like that to support their young people. When you're looking for adults that are part of your community, are there certain qualities that you're looking for that your kids will be, enhanced or enriched by their association with them?
It's funny you should ask that, because that was the hardest thing to find.
Yeah.
When we first moved to Atlanta, it was very difficult to find what I called family-to-family relationships. My husband had relationships at work, and I would get together with the wives from work, and sometimes the couples on the executive team would get together, and those are dear friends to this day. They're wonderful couples that we were all in a journey in a niche, and we needed to walk together in that. And so that they were a blessing to me, and they really reached out to me in some of that culture shock and some of the depression, and it was great. But that was kind of its own community. Their kids weren't necessarily my kids' ages. They weren't my kids. We didn't all go to the same church. It was very different.
The families weren't like this. It was more the couples.
Or then I may find women that were other homeschooling moms or women in the community that I shared something in common with and might have friendships that way or in a neighborhood. But then my husband wouldn't necessarily connect with their husband.
I gotcha. I understand.
So it was very difficult to find family-to-family relationships. And we were attending at the time a very large church in the Atlanta area, a great church that we were involved in to the extent that we could be. But it was so large that even being involved in some of the programming, my daughter, who was, I think, 10 or 12 at the time, came and said, when are we going to build relationships? And we'd been there for 2.5 years. And so we thought, okay, like our kids started expressing, and this is, one of the things I love about that end in mind is, knowing what those goals are, and then the freedom that comes with that allows you to really tap into your kids and to listen to them. And they were expressing a desire for something deeper. So we, at that point, started praying, and we made a decision to change churches based on the fact that we were looking for family-to-family relationships.
Right, gotcha, I see.
And for us, we found it, other than Artios, we found it in a church where we were involved for 8 years in a children's ministry that was an integrated ministry. It was a family integrated ministry. So the philosophy and approach was very much the same as what we're doing in our homeschooling and what Artios does, what your family is practicing. And so we found it there as well, and that was great because we were able to serve alongside families. And so that was really key.
So these were families that were working together in a particular
within the ministry
of the church. Okay,
so so I was coaching a set of teenagers and children.
I see.
But there were also adults acting on those teams. It was a drama. I was a part of the drama ministry of that children's ministry. And so, but then my kids were also in the worship dance program. And so they had the coaches there, and they were also giving back.
But you're all headed towards one end in mind, which is working in that ministry.
And it was always on the same evening.
Gotcha.
Once a month, we would serve, we would practice on a Thursday night, and we would serve on that Sunday morning, both services. So we were backstage. We were with those families. We were really getting to know each other. So I'm very grateful for our season there and for what we learned there. That season is coming to an end. We've shifted churches recently, and again, for our children's sake. The older two, that was a really great fit for them. Those adults were very involved in their life, and they were very plugged in. But as they've moved off to college, the younger two have a little bit of a different bent and are looking for something a little different. And so we've decided that being a part of a smaller, closer to home community church is really preparation for what God has
for
for
those
the
two.
end in mind for those two.
Right.
So
Affects
we
everything.
have to be willing to make those changes, and we're grateful for both places, for every church that we've been involved in, and for those different seasons. But we have gone where we could find people who were going to partner with us and contribute to the end that we believed God was calling each of our children to. So
I think this is such an important topic, and one I want to talk about even more in our next segment. But I just want to thank you for sharing this, because you are
Absolutely.
definitely a master at creating community.
thanks. I'm glad to.